For over 5,000 years, one name has echoed through history as the founder of ancient Egypt, Menes, the very first pharaoh. But what if that story isn't the whole story? Today, we're diving into a 5,000-year-old cold case to figure out the real identity of the king who forged one of the world's greatest civilizations.
So if you open up the history books, they'll tell you that the man who founded the First Dynasty, the one who united the two lands of Upper and Lower Egypt into one mega-kingdom, was a king named Menes. He is the legendary figure, right at the dawn of Egyptian history.
And later historians, like the famous Greek writer Herodotus, they painted him as this absolute giant of the ancient world. I mean, think about it. Not just a warrior king, but an incredible engineer who literally moved the Nile River to build his capital city, Memphis. He was the founding father, the hero who started it all.
Okay, and here is where our mystery really kicks off. For someone this important, this monumental, the name Menes is almost completely gone from the archaeological record of his own time. There are no monuments with his name, no inscriptions, nothing. It's like trying to find proof of King Arthur. So if Menes is a ghost, who was the real king?
To solve this, we've got to rewind the clock, back to a time before a united Egypt even existed. See, this wasn't one country. It was two completely separate kingdoms. You had Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north, and they were constantly fighting for control of the Nile. Each of these kingdoms had its own king, its own traditions, and, really importantly, its own crown. In Upper Egypt, the king wore the hedjet, that tall, bowling pin-shaped white crown. And down in the marshy Nile Delta, the ruler of Lower Egypt wore the deshret, the very distinctive red crown.
The ultimate prize, the symbol that you ruled everything, was the peshent, the double crown. It's a brilliant piece of branding, really. You just stick the white crown inside the red one to show everyone that one king now ruled both lands. So, the big question is, who was the first person to actually earn the right to wear it?
Since Menes is basically a ghost in the historical record, the investigation has narrowed down to two real-life kings who lived around 3100 BCE. So let's meet our main suspects. First up, we have a ruler named Narmer, and believe me, there is some bombshell evidence connected to him. And our second suspect is Hor-Aha, who was probably Narmer's son and successor. The legendary Menes is almost certainly one of these two guys.
All right, it's time to play detective. We're going to treat this just like a forensic investigation and look at the actual clues left behind in stone and ivory to see where the evidence really leads. And our first piece of evidence is, without a doubt, the single most important artifact from the very beginning of Egyptian history, the Narmer Palette. This thing was discovered over 100 years ago, and it tells an absolutely incredible story, carved right into the stone. Now look closely here, because the story is all in the crowns. On one side, you see Narmer wearing the white crown of the south, smiting an enemy. But then you flip it over, and there he is, wearing the red crown of the north, inspecting rows of his defeated foes. This isn't just a pretty carving, it's a political billboard from 3100 BCE. It's the clearest evidence we have of one king claiming total control over both lands. So the case for Narmer is, frankly, incredibly strong. The palette basically shows him in the act of unification. And if that wasn't enough, archaeologists have found ancient seal impressions that show his name, Narmer, right next to the symbol MN, which everyone reads as Menes. It really seems like an open and shut case, right?
Well, not so fast. Just when you think the mystery is solved, another piece of evidence comes to light. And this one points directly at our other suspect, Hor-Aha. It's this tiny little ivory label, found in a tomb, and it changes everything. So in this small but really important artifact, we see the king's official royal name, Aha, right next to a little building that contains the hieroglyph Men. To a lot of Egyptologists, this is a direct contemporary link between King Hor-Aha and the name Menes. And just like that, the case is blown wide open again. And here's the biggest complication of all. We're pretty certain that Narmer and Hor-Aha were two different people. For one, they had separate tombs at the royal cemetery. And even more convincing, later Egyptian king lists, which are usually pretty reliable, show them as two distinct kings who ruled one right after the other, most likely father and son. So what is going on here? How can they both be Menes? Well, to untangle this, you have to understand that ancient Egyptian pharaohs didn't just have one name like we do. They had a whole collection of titles and names, which can make figuring out who's who a real headache. The most important name for these early kings was their Horus name. Both Narmer and Hor-Aha are Horus names.
Now, it was extremely rare for a single king to have two different Horus names. This really strengthens the argument that we are, in fact, looking at two different rulers.
So this brings us right back to the heart of our mystery. If Narmer and Hor-Aha were two separate kings, one after the other, then who, or maybe what, was Menes?
This is where we get into some really cool theories. The first idea is that Menes was just a personal name, maybe the birth name of either Narmer or Hor-Aha. Another theory? It wasn't a name at all, but a title. The name itself can be translated as "He Who Endures," which sounds exactly like the kind of title you'd give to a legendary hero. And finally, there's the idea that Menes is a composite legend, that centuries later the Egyptians just simplified the story and rolled the achievements of a few different kings into one single heroic founder.
So, we've met the suspects, we've looked at the clues, and we've weighed all the theories. After all this digging, what do most experts think today? What's the verdict in this ancient mystery?
Despite all the conflicting clues and complications, the mainstream view among Egyptologists today lands on one person. They argue that the legendary Menes should be identified with the historical king Narmer. That visual evidence on the Narmer Palette is just too powerful to ignore.
But the real story is probably a lot more complex. I mean, unifying an entire country isn't something that happens in a single afternoon, right? It's a long, messy process. So the most likely scenario is this. Narmer started the military conquest. Then his son, Hor-Aha, and maybe even the next king continued the work, solidifying control and building the new government. Then, centuries later, history just simplified this whole multi-generational saga into the neat and tidy story of one founding hero, Menes.
So, if you want the bottom line, it's this. Menes is the legend, the simple, heroic story of unification. But Narmer was the man, the real king whose actions on the battlefield kicked the whole thing off.
And that kind of brings us to a final, bigger question. This whole mystery isn't just about dusty artifacts. It's about how we tell stories about our own history. We love to simplify things down to one heroic individual. But it makes you wonder, does every great origin story really need a single hero? Or is the messier, more complicated truth actually a lot more interesting?